Hi everyone, my name is David and I'm from Nature's Child. Today we are going to be talking about and learning about the Caledonian forests and Scots pine, which is a very special type of tree that you can find within the Caledonian forest. Before we start, why is learning about the natural world important? Well, if we don't understand the natural world, the species that we find around us, especially close by in our own country or area, then how can we protect them? How can we ensure that they are thriving and continue to give us these beneficial things that we need for our own lives? So it's important to know about and to understand how everything works around us. So you will have your Nature's Child Scots Pine First Edition box, and today we will be going through some of the things that are inside the box. So you will find real Scots pine leaves, seeds that you can plant, cones, as well as many different activity cards that can guide you through different activities that will help you to understand more about Scots pine, about the Caledonian forest, and also just be a bit of fun. So today we will go through the box and we'll also learn some knowledge about the Scots pine. In our series of boxes we theme around a habitat. So what is a habitat? A habitat is a place or environment where an animal or species lives. It can be as small as a pot of soil. You will have very tiny organisms and species that live in that soil. It can be as big as a forest. And a habitat contains all the things that an animal or species needs to survive. So food, water, and shelter. Today we're going to be talking about a very special type of habitat that you can only find in northern Scotland within the UK, and it's called the Caledonian forest. The Caledonian forest is a magical place that is almost like an ancient relic of the past. It's very difficult to find in the UK now, and there are only a few pockets of natural Caledonian forest that are remaining. The Caledonian forest is dominated by one species. We call it the king of the Caledonian forest, and that is the Scots pine tree. So today we will be talking about the Scots pine tree and about the Caledonian forest, and hopefully afterwards you'll have a better sense of the Caledonian forest, what animals live within the forest, what species, what plants, and maybe one day you can go and visit. Okay, let's learn a little bit about the Scots pine tree. Firstly, it's important to know that the Scots pine is a conifer tree. What is a conifer tree? Well, conifer trees usually have needles for leaves, so they're very thin, long, and spiky types of leaves. They're very different from another type of tree called broadleaf tree. Broadleaf trees are your wide, flat, typical type of trees that you will find in parks and gardens and along your street. Examples include an oak tree or a birch tree. And these are the leaves that fall down in the autumn and clog up your driveways and the streets. Okay, so a conifer tree has needles for leaves. It's also evergreen, so they don't lose their leaves in the winter time. So that's a great way to be able to identify or start to identify a Scots pine. If you go into a park in the winter time, you want to be looking for trees that still have their leaves, conifers. Conifers also have cones. So needles for leaves, evergreen, and cones. That's a conifer tree. A pine is a type of conifer. Scots pine is the only type of pine tree that you can find that's native in the UK. By native, I mean it belongs here. It wasn't brought by someone or something, and the UK is its natural habitat. Okay, so it's a pine tree, and pine trees you can identify because the leaves, the needles, they come in clusters of 2, 3 or 5. And that's another great way to be able to identify Scots pine, because the clusters are in pairs, so 2. So if you see a pine tree and you have a look and the leaves are in a cluster of 3 or 5, then it's not a Scots pine. It has to be in a pair. It has to be just 2 leaves connected to the stem, to the branch. Okay? Where can you find Scots pine? Well, it's actually a common tree in the UK. You can find it in parks, in some gardens, but if you want to see it in its natural habitat, where it dominates the landscape, where it's the tree that you can see the most, then you need to go to the Scottish Highlands. You need to go to the Caledonian forests, and there are several places where you can see the Scots pine and the Caledonian forest. And this type of forest is more like something that you would expect to find in other countries in Europe, maybe Sweden or Norway or even Russia. So there's not much left of it. It really is a very rare habitat. And there are organizations such as Trees for Life and the RSPB who are protecting the Caledonian forest and also trying to expand it by planting trees and by stopping animals like deer from eating the young shoots. Now, Scots pine is actually one of the most common trees in the world. It's one of the most widespread. You can find Scots pine trees all the way from the very east of Europe, east of Asia actually, Russia, all the way across through Europe, and the most western part is Scotland. So it's very common. And also an interesting fact about Scots pine, it's the most common Christmas tree in the USA. So they like to plant Scots pine trees, which they call Scotch pine, because they make beautiful Christmas trees. So how do you identify a Scots pine? Well, firstly, it needs to be evergreen. So if it's in the winter time and you see a tree that has leaves, it could possibly be a Scots pine. So if the tree that you think may be a Scots pine has no leaves in winter, it's not Scots pine, it's evergreen. Okay. The second thing to look at is its bark, is the outside of the tree, the trunk. Now if it's a tall tree, as you look at the top of the tree, you'll see it starts to become redder and redder. It has a sort of reddish bark the higher up you get. Lower down it becomes more of a grey colour, but it does still have patches of red. It's not a smooth bark, right? So if you run your hands against the bark, it's not going to feel nice and smooth. It's very rough, and there'll be lots of what we call fissures, which are just essentially lots of cracks in the tree. Okay? Another way of identifying a Scots pine is its leaves. So have a close look at the leaves. They need to be in pairs. Okay, so as we discussed previously, pine trees, their leaves are needles and they come in clusters of 2, 3 or 5. Scots pine leaves come in pairs. So they have 2 leaves that are connected together. Now the leaves are about 8 centimeters long, 6 to 8 centimeters long, which is about this long, right? Some pine trees have much longer leaves. So if you see a pine tree with leaves about this long, it's not a Scots pine. The leaves are lightish green, but they also can have a bit of a very light blue tint. Another way of being able to identify a Scots pine is they usually have trunks that grow very straight. The older they get, the more bent they become. They have lots of funny shapes when they are mature trees, old trees. But when they're relatively young, they grow very straight, and they look like Christmas trees when they're still young. So if you see a tree that looks like a Christmas tree, maybe it's a Scots pine. So what types of animals, what types of species will be associated with Scots pine? Well, if we're looking at mammals, then red squirrel, they love the Caledonian forest, and the Caledonian forest is the best place to still find red squirrels in the wild. They're doing very well there. Also, pine martens. A pine marten is actually a squirrel's very good friend, a red squirrel's good friend. And what scientists have found, that in areas where there are no pine trees, there are lots of grey squirrels, which are not native to the UK. They're from North America. Now the grey squirrels, they spread a disease that basically kills the red squirrels. So areas with no pine martens and grey squirrels usually equals no red squirrels. But what scientists have found is when they bring pine martens back, the pine martens will be able to more easily hunt the grey squirrels. Red squirrels are smaller, they can balance on the very light branches. So that just shows you how certain species can help each other and keep that balance. If we're looking at birds, the capercaillie, which is a very unique bird. It looks a bit like a turkey. It doesn't fly, and it makes a very strange noise when it's looking for females to breed with. And they are only found in the Caledonian forest. The crested tit is a bird that you will normally only find in the Caledonian forest, and they have a beautiful tuft of hair. And you can see we captured some video of the crested tit when we went to visit. Another bird is the Scottish crossbill, which is unique to that area. It's endemic, which means you can't find it anywhere else. Plants, lots of heather. You might find heather in your garden at home. Lots of mosses and lichens that cover the trees, and they need areas that are very wet. You will also find the European blueberry, which is called a bilberry. So if you go to the Caledonian forest in summertime or towards the end of summer, with your parents, with someone who understands how to forage safely, you'll be able to collect some blueberries that you don't have to buy in a supermarket. So what is Scots pine used for? It's a very good timber tree, which means that we can use the wood to make big things. So we can use the wood of a Scots pine tree to make a house, to make a shed, because the wood is very strong and it grows very straight and it grows fast. So Scots pine is a very popular timber tree. You can also use it to make pine tea tree. So the leaves you can place in a cup, add some hot water, and after a while the flavour will infuse the water and you can have a nice tea. Don't do that with the leaves in your box because they haven't been treated, but you can buy pine tea tree. Okay, so how about we open our box and have a look what's inside. You'll be able to see the front of the box is actually a Caledonian forest. So you can see some Scots pine trees. Here we have a crested tit, which is a special bird that lives within the Caledonian forest habitat. We have red squirrels, which you can find many of. Okay, so let's open this box up. We really like this cover. If you like the cover, maybe you can use it as a poster in your bedroom. You can just cut around the top and the bottom and put it somewhere nice. So we'll leave that here. And then we'll open up the box. Okay, so the first thing that I suggest you have a look at is the real tree materials of the Scots pine. Okay, so we open this up. You will find some Scots pine leaves. Okay, so we'll put them to the side. And we have some cones. Don't forget, Scots pine is a conifer tree, and all conifer trees have cones. So if you're in the park and you see a big tree, it has its leaves, in the winter especially, and you see it has cones, it's a conifer. Maybe it's a Scots pine. So we'll put these to the side. Okay. This is a plant pot that you will be putting your soil in. It is biodegradable, it's compostable, so all that means is it doesn't have any plastic in. If you put it in your compost bin or even in your garden, it will break down into soil, so it's very good. And here we have a block of compost. All you need to do is place this in a pot, not this pot. Place it in a pot, add some water, and just wait for 3 to 5 minutes, and the compost block will break down and you'll have enough soil to put in your pot and then add your seeds. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Okay, we have our Scots pine seeds. They are very small, so be careful with them, but they will grow into trees if you look after them. And here are the activity cards. You'll notice it's wrapped in nice beautiful string. You need to keep the string because you will be using that for the pine needle paintbrush making activity. Okay? So we open this up. There we go. Nice piece of string. Put this to one side. You have 5 cards. Scots pine tree age activity. So using your paper measuring tape, you will be able to estimate the age of a Scots pine tree. We have the seed planting activity, all the instructions and some pictures on how to plant your seeds and look after them. Here we have the Caledonian forest diorama, which you will be making with the box itself. This is a very creative activity. So there are instructions, there are some guidance, but have a look at some of the pictures on the back and get some inspiration. And you can go into the park and you can find your own pine needles, your own grass, your own sticks or cones that you can add into your diorama. Or you could print off some animals that you would like to cut out, colour and stick onto your background. It's up to you. Here we have the pine needle paintbrush activity. Now for this, I recommend you go to a park, you find a nice stick, give it a wash when you get home, and then you'll have a stick, a handle, to make your paintbrush with. You have some pine needles here, but if you want to use this for your diorama, or you just would like to put it in a book, or you'd like to keep hold of it, you could go and collect some pine leaves from your local park or nature reserve. And finally, we have a knowledge test. To be able to know the answers to these questions, you will need to have read the magazine, either yourself or with your parents, or have watched this video. There might be some answers in this video, but all of the answers are definitely within the magazine. And if you reach 50%, which is 5 correct answers, your parents will be able to give you a small prize. Okay, so what else do we have? In here we have a Scots pine collectible card. Okay. On the back, you will see some information about the Scots pine. And in the future series of boxes, each species will include a species card. Next time it might be a red squirrel. In the future it might be an oak tree. So you can collect these, keep them safe. Okay. We have some Nature's Child stickers, because who doesn't like stickers? I do. And here we have our magazine, okay? All about the Scots pine tree. So it will tell you information about where you find it. And it will give you information on how to identify it. So have a good read through the magazine. All the answers are contained to the quiz within this, and you'll learn some really interesting information about Scots pine. Okay, what do we have here? We have a couple of colouring sheets. First is a Scots pine tree, fairly simple. Colour that in. And here we have our Eurasian lynx. Now, we don't have any lynx in the UK anymore. Unfortunately, they were hunted to extinction. Extinction means they no longer live or survive here in the United Kingdom. But they do survive elsewhere in Europe. So in France, in Germany, Sweden, Norway, Belgium, they all have lynx. And there are plans to bring the lynx back to the UK, because they play an important part in the ecosystem. They keep the balance. Maybe you've seen foxes in your cities. Well, in the countryside there are too many foxes, way too many rabbits, and when you have too much of one species, it affects everything else. So maybe if we get lynx back, we'll have a healthier ecosystem. And last but not least, we have some background coloured card for your diorama. So what you will want to do is find some glue or some sticky tape, and this will just simply be a background to your diorama. Now you will need to add to this, otherwise it won't look very nice. You could add some white fluffy clouds, you could add a sun. You can use your pine needles, cut them up, and you can place some trees here. Some children like to put a river there. It's up to you. Be creative. Okay? So that's everything in our box. And now I'm going to take you through some information and knowledge of the Scots pine tree. This will all be found in the magazine, but sometimes video is a bit nicer, isn't it? So, I hope you've learned a lot more about Scots pine and about the Caledonian forest, and you have an appreciation for the tree and how good it is for us. It's not just about what's in the box. We want you to go outside. We want you to go to your park, to go to a nature reserve, or maybe even one day to go to the Scottish Highlands and the Caledonian forest. And you can tell your parents or your friends about the Scots pine tree, how to identify it, what types of animals and species use the Scots pine tree, what we can use it for, and where you can find it in your local area. If we understand more about our native wildlife, then we can start to do more to protect it here in the UK, and then we can start to look at other habitats around the world and understand things in the US, things in China, things in Australia. Now, don't forget, this is the first in a series of 4 boxes for the Caledonian forest habitat. The next box is about red squirrels. You may know something about the red squirrels already, you may even have seen one. But we're going to go a little bit more in depth in our next box, Red Squirrel Caledonian Forest. I'm David from Nature's Child. Thank you very much.